My name is Susanna, and at 32, I had dedicated 8 years of my life to Meridian Tech as a senior financial analyst. I knew every client contract and revenue stream by heart, information even our CEO could not fully grasp. Then came that fateful day when HR called me in for a meeting that would change everything. I never imagined my specialized knowledge would become the catalyst for a corporate earthquake. Before I tell you how I turned my company upside down, drop a comment letting me know if you have ever been undervalued at work, and do not forget to subscribe for more corporate justice stories. When I joined Meridian Tech 8 years ago, I was fresh out of business school with an MBA from Princeton. Several Fortune 500 companies had offered me positions with significantly higher salaries, but something about Meridian spoke to me. It was not just the innovative technology they were developing, but the culture that seemed to value every employee from the janitor to the executives. The previous CEO, Thomas Bennett, had built a reputation for fostering talent and rewarding loyalty. I turned down an offer paying 30% more because I believed in Meridian's vision. From day one, I poured myself into understanding every aspect of our business. While my official title was Senior Financial Analyst, my role expanded far beyond typical financial modeling. I specialized in client contracts, particularly the complex revenue-sharing agreements that governed our relationships with major clients. These were intricate legal documents with financial implications that even our legal team sometimes struggled to navigate. Over time, I became the go-to person for anything related to our major client agreements. I could recite terms from memory, predict revenue with uncanny accuracy, and spot potential issues before they became problems. The clients knew and trusted me. When Andrew Reynolds, the procurement director at Global Solutions, our largest client, needed to understand how a contract clause affected their bottom line, he called me directly, not our account managers. "Susanna, you explain things more clearly than anyone else." At Meridian, Andrew once told me during a client dinner, "You understand our business almost better than we do." I had personally negotiated or renegotiated contracts that generated 40% of our company's revenue. These were not simple agreements but contained specialized stakeholder clauses that I had designed to protect both Meridian and our clients. My fingerprints were on every major revenue stream. My dedication to Meridian extended beyond normal working hours. I routinely stayed late, worked weekends when necessary, and even postponed vacations to ensure projects were completed. My small one-bedroom apartment just 15 minutes from the office was modest despite my contributions to the company. I drove the same Honda Civic I had purchased as a graduate student. Material luxuries were less important to me than building something meaningful at Meridian. The company culture that had initially attracted me remained strong for the first 6 years. We celebrated successes together, supported each other through challenges, and genuinely felt like a team working toward a common goal. The annual retreats, team-building activities, and regular recognition programs reinforced the sense that we were valued. But things began to change when Thomas Bennett retired 2 years ago. The board appointed Richard Harlow as the new CEO, a man with a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and maximizing shareholder value at his previous companies. He brought in his own team, including Melissa Parker as the new HR director. The shift in culture was subtle at first, but accelerated rapidly. The first red flags appeared 6 months after Richard took over. The annual employee retreat was canceled. The comfortable break room furniture was replaced with bare-bones alternatives. The educational reimbursement program was temporarily suspended. Free coffee in the break room became cheap, bitter stuff that most people avoided. Small changes, but they signaled a different philosophy. In company-wide meetings, Richard spoke constantly about streamlining operations and optimizing human resources. The warmth that had characterized Meridian was replaced with corporate jargon and productivity metrics. People began watching the clock more carefully. The easy collaboration between departments became strained as resources grew scarce and teams competed for budget allocations. Despite these changes, I maintained my dedication. Meridian was publicly traded, but had been struggling with investor confidence for the past year. I understood the pressure Richard faced to improve our financials. I believed that by continuing to serve our clients exceptionally well, I was helping the company weather this difficult period. I remained the bridge between Meridian and our most valuable clients. When Andrew Reynolds expressed concern about the leadership changes, I reassured him that our commitment to service remained unchanged. When other clients noticed delayed responses from their account managers, I stepped in to smooth ruffled feathers. My client relationships built over years of trust and results were perhaps my most valuable contribution to Meridian. Little did I know that my dedication and specialized knowledge would soon be dismissed as non-essential by people who fundamentally misunderstood the business they were running. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the calendar notification appeared on my screen. Meeting with HR and Finance. 3:00 p.m. Boardroom. No agenda, no explanation. In the past, such vague meetings had usually been about promotions or special projects, but under the new leadership, they often meant something less pleasant. I spent the next hour reviewing my recent work, ensuring all my reports were up to date, and mentally preparing for whatever was coming. At precisely 3, I knocked on the boardroom door and entered to find Melissa Parker from HR and James Wilson, our CFO, seated at the far end of the long conference table. "Susanna, please take a seat," Melissa gestured to a chair positioned across from them. The room felt unusually cold, and not just from the aggressive air conditioning that Richard had insisted on to keep people alert. The large boardroom designed for 20 people felt cavernous with just the 3 of us. I noticed immediately that James would not meet my eyes. He was fidgeting with his pen, clicking it repeatedly, a nervous habit I had observed in previous tense meetings. Melissa, by contrast, looked completely comfortable, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "We have been conducting a comprehensive review of personnel costs." Melissa began, her voice crisp and detached. "As you know, the company is implementing a strategic realignment of resources to maximize shareholder value." The corporate jargon was thick, but I had been in the business world long enough to recognize the prelude to bad news. Still, nothing prepared me for what came next. "Effective next pay period, your compensation will be reduced by 60%. Melissa stated, sliding a document across the table. "We have identified your position as non-essential to core operations." The words hit me like a physical blow. 60%. More than half my salary. Gone. Non-essential. After 8 years of dedication, countless late nights, and relationships that had secured millions in revenue. "I do not understand." I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the shock. "I directly manage our relationships with clients who generate nearly half our annual revenue." Melissa's smile widened slightly. "Those relationships belong to the company, Susanna, not to you. Any competent analyst could maintain them with the proper documentation." The dismissive way she said "any competent analyst" made it clear she had no understanding of the complex personal relationships I had built with our clients. With respect, I continued, "Andrew Reynolds at Global Solutions specifically requests to work with me. I negotiated the special stakeholder clauses that protected both our interests during the last contract renewal. These relationships are built on years of trust." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but remained silent. Melissa's expression hardened. "If Andrew Reynolds wishes to continue doing business with Meridian Tech, he will adapt to working with whoever we assign," she said. "As for the contract details, that is what we have a legal department for." My heart was racing now, but I fought to maintain my professional composure. "May I ask what criteria were used to determine that my position is non-essential?" Melissa glanced down at a folder in front of her. "Your technical skills, while adequate, are not unique in the marketplace. Your responsibilities can be distributed among remaining team members or outsourced at a significantly lower cost." Each word felt like another twist of the knife. 8 years of exceeding every performance metric of building value that appeared nowhere on the spreadsheets Melissa had undoubtedly used to make this decision. "Is this happening across the company?" I asked. "This is a targeted efficiency measure," Melissa replied, which I understood to mean I had been specifically selected. I looked at James, who had worked with me since before the change in leadership. He knew my value. He had praised my work countless times in the past. "James," I said quietly. He finally looked up, his expression pained. "The decision has been made, Susanna. We need to prioritize core operations in this economic climate." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was not just a pay cut. It was a calculated move to force me to resign without the company having to pay severance. A constructive dismissal wrapped in corporate doublespeak. "You have until tomorrow to sign the new compensation agreement," Melissa said, pushing another document toward me. Of course we understand if you choose to explore opportunities elsewhere. The smug satisfaction in her voice made it clear that my departure was the expected and desired outcome. They did not want me at a reduced salary. They wanted me gone without having to fire me. I gathered the documents with hands that I was surprised to see were not shaking. I will review these and respond accordingly, I said, struggling to maintain my dignity. As I stood to leave, Melissa added, "Please keep this conversation confidential. Other adjustments are still being finalized." The walk back to my desk felt like the longest of my life. Colleagues glanced up as I passed a few, offering smiles that I could not return. Had some of them already accepted similar cuts, were others scheduled for meetings later that day? At my desk, I methodically gathered my personal items. The small plant I had nurtured for years, a framed photo of my parents, a coffee mug given to me by a grateful client. I was not quitting. Not yet, but something told me to be prepared. As the shock began to give way to the first stirrings of anger, I realized that Melissa and Richard had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had looked at spreadsheets and job descriptions but failed to understand the true nature of the business they were supposedly streamlining. In treating me as disposable, they had overlooked something crucial, something that would soon shake Meridian Tech to its foundations. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the compensation agreement, the 60% reduction in salary glaring up at me from the page. The shock had given way to a hollow feeling in my stomach. 8 years of loyalty, of putting the company first, had culminated in this cold dismissal of my value. My phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues who had noticed my abrupt departure from the office. I ignored them for now, needing time to process what had happened and decide on my next steps. As I poured myself a glass of wine, my mind drifted back to a business conference in San Francisco 6 months earlier. I had been representing Meridian at a panel discussion on financial technology partnerships when Eleanor Maxwell approached me afterward. Eleanor was the CEO of Axion Systems, one of our main competitors, a company known for its aggressive growth strategy and employee-centered culture. "Your analysis of the partnership model was impressive," she had said, handing me her business card. "If you ever decide Meridian is not fully appreciating your talents, I would love to have a conversation." I had politely thanked her but tucked the card away without much thought. My loyalty to Meridian had been absolute then. Now I found myself searching through my desk drawer until I found the slightly bent business card with Eleanor's direct number. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed. It was nearly 9 in the evening and I half expected to reach her voicemail. Instead, she answered on the third ring. "Eleanor Maxwell." "Miss Maxwell, this is Susanna Ross from Meridian Tech. We met at the FinTech conference in San Francisco. I apologize for calling so late." "Susanna, of course I remember you. And please call me Eleanor. No apology necessary. I tend to work late. What can I do for you?" There was a moment of hesitation. Once I spoke the next words, I would be crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. "I believe I am ready for that conversation you mentioned," I said carefully. There was a brief pause before Eleanor responded, her voice measured but with a hint of interest. "I see. Are you free to meet this evening?" I am still at my office downtown. 2 hours later, I was seated across from Eleanor in a private dining room at Luciano's, an upscale Italian restaurant known for its discretion and private business meetings. The restaurant was nearly empty at this late hour, and the staff had been instructed not to disturb us. Eleanor listened intently as I described the meeting with HR and the 60% pay reduction. I was careful not to share any confidential information about Meridian, focusing instead on my own situation. "Unfortunately, what happened to you is becoming common practice under Richard Harlow's leadership," Eleanor said when I finished. "He has a reputation for this kind of cost-cutting without understanding the human capital he is destroying." She took a sip of her wine before continuing. "What many people do not know is that Richard was briefly on our board 3 years ago. His methods were so controversial that several key executives threatened to resign if he remained. The board asked him to step down. This was news to me and explained the dramatic culture shift at Meridian since his arrival." "Susanna, I want to be direct with you," Eleanor continued. "Axion has been considering a potential acquisition of Meridian for some time. Your company has excellent technology and market position, but Richard's leadership is rapidly eroding its value and reputation." She leaned forward slightly. What I am about to propose involves some risk but also potentially significant reward for you. As Eleanor outlined her proposal, I felt a complex mix of emotions. What she was suggesting was bold, potentially career-defining, and walked a fine ethical line without crossing into anything illegal. You mentioned the stakeholder clauses in your client contracts, Eleanor said. Those could be extremely relevant to our strategy. A realization dawned on me. When I had negotiated our contracts with major clients like Global Solutions, I had included special stakeholder clauses that gave the client certain rights if key personnel involved in servicing their account left the company. These clauses were designed to protect both Meridian and the clients by ensuring continuity of service. As the named stakeholder in many of these contracts, my departure could trigger client review rights that few at Meridian, including Richard and Melissa, probably remembered existed. There is a loophole in my non-compete agreement, I said slowly. It becomes void if my compensation is reduced by more than 25% without a corresponding reduction in responsibilities. Eleanor smiled. Then legally you could come work for us immediately if you chose to. We spent the next hour discussing Meridian's vulnerabilities and how Axion might structure a takeover bid. Eleanor explained that Axion had the capital ready for such a move but had been waiting for the right strategic opportunity. Your knowledge of the client relationships and contract details could be the key, she said. If enough major clients indicated they would support an Axion acquisition, it would significantly strengthen our position. As the evening progressed, the outlines of a plan took shape. Eleanor proposed that I help Axion prepare a hostile takeover bid that would leverage the stakeholder clauses I had created. In return, I would be guaranteed a senior executive position in the combined company at double my original Meridian salary. The ethical implications weighed heavily on me. Was I betraying Meridian? Or was I simply responding to their betrayal of me and the values that had once made the company great? I need to be clear about something, I said finally. I will not share proprietary technology information or trade secrets. My assistance will be limited to publicly available information and my own knowledge of the contract structures and client relationships. Eleanor nodded. Absolutely. We want to do this by the book. Our legal team will ensure everything is above board. By the time we left the restaurant close to midnight, I had made my decision. The company I had loved and served faithfully for 8 years no longer existed. It had been transformed into something unrecognizable by Richard Harlow and his team. Perhaps this was the only way to restore what had been lost. As I drove home, a strange calm replaced the turmoil of earlier in the day. For the first time since that devastating meeting with HR, I felt a sense of control returning. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be a passive victim of corporate callousness. The next morning, I arrived at the Meridian office at my usual time. 7:30, a full hour before most of my colleagues. The familiar routine felt surreal now that I knew what was coming. I nodded to the security guard Roger, who had always appreciated that I knew his name when many executives did not. I wondered how the coming changes would affect him. At my desk, I began my day as I always did, checking emails and preparing for pending client calls. To anyone observing, I was the same dedicated employee I had always been. Inside, I was strategizing each move with chess-like precision. Eleanor had worked through the night with her executive team and legal counsel. At 6 that morning, she had texted me, wheels in motion. Maintain normal operations. We'll update this evening. My first task was to compile information that would help Axion structure their takeover bid. This required careful navigation of my ethical boundaries. I would not download confidential files or forward internal emails, but I could legally document my own work contributions and client relationship details from memory. During my lunch break, I created a personal document outlining the stakeholder clauses I had negotiated, all public information about Meridian's financial position and notes on which clients might be receptive to a change in ownership. This was information I had created or that existed in my memory. Nothing that required accessing restricted company systems. At 2 o'clock, I had a previously scheduled call with Andrew Reynolds from Global Solutions. Under normal circumstances, I would have discussed their upcoming contract renewal. Today, I had a different agenda. Andrew, I wanted to give you a heads up about some changes at Meridian that might affect our working relationship, I began carefully. Let me guess, he replied. More cost-cutting measures from your new leadership. Something like that, I confirmed. There is a possibility I may not be your point of contact going forward. There was a pause before Andrew responded, his voice concerned. Susanna, you have been our only consistent contact at Meridian for years. Every account manager they assign us leaves within months. You are the only one who truly understands our needs. I appreciate that, Andrew. I just want to make sure you are prepared if things change. Remember the stakeholder clause we included in your last contract renewal? Vaguely, he admitted. Something about our right to review the relationship if key personnel change. Exactly. Section 12.4 specifically names me as a key stakeholder. If I were to leave, Meridian Global Solutions would have the right to reassess the contract with a 60-day notice period. Andrew was silent for a moment, processing the implications. Are you telling me you are leaving Meridian? I am saying that circumstances are evolving, and I want to ensure you are aware of your contractual rights. I replied carefully. You might want to review that section with your legal team. By the end of our conversation, Andrew understood that significant changes were coming. Without explicitly saying so, I had prepared him for the possibility of Meridian changing hands. Similar conversations with other key clients followed throughout the afternoon. I was meticulous about not disparaging Meridian or soliciting clients to follow me elsewhere, actions that could violate my employment agreement. I simply ensured they were aware of their rights under our existing contracts. Between client calls, I gathered documentation of my contributions to Meridian's revenue. These were not confidential documents, but records of my achievements, performance reviews, client testimonials, and revenue reports that showed the accounts I managed. This information would help Eleanor quantify my value to potential investors and board members. As 5 o'clock approached, colleagues began packing up for the day. Several stopped by my desk to check in, having noticed my subdued mood. Everything okay? Susanna asked Rachel from marketing. You seem quiet today. Just focused on the global solutions renewal, I replied with a smile that did not reach my eyes. You know how it is with big clients. After most people had left, I received another text from Eleanor, progress exceeding expectations. Meeting confirmed for 8 p.m., same location. At Luciano's that evening, Eleanor was accompanied by 2 people she introduced as Axion's chief legal counsel David Chen and their head of finance Sarah Mahmood. The energy around the table was focused and intense. We have been working on this all day, Eleanor began. Based on the information you provided about the stakeholder clauses and our own analysis of Meridian's market position, we believe we can make a compelling case to your board and shareholders. David, the legal counsel, explained. We have confirmed that 7 of Meridian's top 10 clients have similar stakeholder clauses naming you specifically. These represent approximately 40% of annual revenue. If these clients indicated they might reconsider their contracts following your departure, it would significantly impact Meridian's valuation. Sarah added, our financial team has prepared a takeover bid valuing Meridian at $400 million, a 20% premium over the current market cap. We believe this will be attractive to shareholders, especially given the company's recent performance challenges. The plan was moving faster than I had anticipated. Eleanor intended to announce the takeover bid the very next morning before market open. Are you comfortable with this timeline? She asked me. Once we announce, there is no going back. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Was I really going to participate in a hostile takeover of the company I had helped build? Then I remembered Melissa's smug expression as she called me non-essential, and the calculated attempt to force me out without severance. I am ready, I said firmly. But I need your assurance that the employees at Meridian will be treated fairly in any transition. Many of them are talented people who have been caught in a toxic leadership situation. Eleanor nodded. That is actually part of our strategy. We want to retain Meridian's talent. Our announcement will specifically mention job security for rank-and-file employees. As we finalized the details, I experienced moments of doubt. Was I betraying my colleagues? Would this action hurt the company I had once loved? But I reminded myself that the Meridian I had loved was already gone hollowed out by Richard's leadership. Perhaps this was the only way to save what remained of its potential. That night I barely slept. The next day would change everything. For me, for Meridian, and for the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods hung in the balance. I hoped I was doing the right thing. I arrived at the office the next morning at 7, even earlier than usual. The quiet of the nearly empty building matched my nervous energy as I prepared for what was coming. At precisely 8:30, Eleanor had informed me Axion would issue a press release announcing their $400 million offer for Meridian Tech. As I settled at my desk with a cup of coffee, I noticed an unusual flurry of activity around the executive suite. Richard Harlow had arrived uncharacteristically early, and senior leaders were being called in one by one. Something was happening, but it was impossible to tell if it was related to our plan. At 8:25, my phone vibrated with a text from Eleanor announcement in 5 minutes. Ready. I responded with a simple yes and tried to focus on my computer screen while my heart pounded in my chest. At 8:32, the office erupted in sudden activity. Richard's assistant burst from the executive suite and began frantically notifying department heads of an emergency all-hands meeting in the main conference room at 9. The news spread across the floor like wildfire, with confused employees gathering in small groups speculating about the cause. Rachel from marketing rushed over to my desk. "Do you know what is happening?" Jacob from sales said he heard something about Axion Systems on CNBC just now. I shook my head, maintaining my cover. No idea. Guess we will find out at 9. By 8:45, the news had spread throughout the building. Axion Systems, our chief competitor, had announced an unsolicited takeover bid for Meridian Tech, valuing the company at $400 million. The offer represented a significant premium over our current stock price, which had been languishing for months under Richard's leadership. As we filed into the main conference room at 9, the tension was palpable. Richard Harlow stood at the front, his face ashen, flanked by Melissa Parker and James Wilson. The boardroom, designed to hold 100 people, was packed to capacity with anxious employees. As most of you have undoubtedly heard by now, Richard began, his voice strained. Axion Systems has made an unsolicited offer to acquire Meridian Tech. I want to assure everyone that the board and executive team view this as an unwelcome and hostile action. He continued with corporate platitudes about exploring all options and acting in the best interests of shareholders, but the room had already descended into whispered conversations. Many employees, frustrated by the recent cost-cutting measures, seemed cautiously optimistic about the possibility of new leadership. Furthermore, Richard continued, raising his voice to regain control of the room. We have reason to believe that Axion has been working with someone inside Meridian to facilitate this hostile action. A hush fell over the room. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. I met his gaze, steadily refusing to show any reaction. We have just received the detailed offer from Axion. Richard continued, holding up a document. It specifically references client contracts with stakeholder clauses that could be triggered by personnel changes. The room was now completely silent, all eyes following the drama unfolding at the front. What is particularly concerning, Richard said, his voice rising with anger, is that Axion seems to believe they have the support of several of our key clients, including Global Solutions. At that moment, Richard's assistant hurried into the room and whispered something to James, who immediately passed a note to Richard. As he read it, the color drained further from his face. I have just been informed, he said slowly, that Andrew Reynolds from Global Solutions has requested an urgent call with our board. Apparently, he has concerns about the continuity of service under current management. Richard's eyes snapped back to me, narrowing with sudden understanding. This is about the stakeholder clauses, is it not? Susanna? The ones that name you specifically. All eyes in the room turned to me. I stood up slowly, conscious of the attention but keeping my composure. Yes, Richard. Several of our largest clients insisted on those clauses because of the relationships I have built with them over 8 years. They trusted me to protect their interests within Meridian. Richard's face contorted with fury. You did this. You contacted Axion. It was not a question, and I did not treat it as one. Instead, I addressed the room at large. Yesterday I was informed that my position was non-essential, and my salary was being cut by 60%, despite the fact that I manage relationships generating 40% of our annual revenue. My voice was calm but carried throughout the silent room. It became clear to me that the current leadership does not understand what truly creates value in our business. Melissa stepped forward, her face flushed. This is outrageous. You have betrayed this company and everyone in this room." Several voices rose in protest, not at me, but at Melissa's accusation. It seemed I was not the only one who had suffered under the new regime. "I have betrayed no one," I replied evenly. "I have not shared any proprietary information or trade secrets. I have simply ensured that our clients are aware of their rights under contracts that I personally negotiated." Richard was frantically flipping through the offer document, finally stopping at a page near the end. His face went from red to white as he read. "The key stakeholder clause," he muttered before looking up at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "My God, that is you. You are named in all these contracts." I nodded. "In the contracts with our 10 largest clients, yes. It was standard practice under Thomas Bennett's leadership to name the key relationship manager as a stakeholder. It protected both the client and Meridian by ensuring continuity of service." Richard turned to James. "Did you know about this?" James looked uncomfortable. "The clauses were mentioned in the contract summaries. I assumed legal had reviewed the implications." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, accusations, questions, expressions of shock, and from some quarters barely concealed satisfaction at seeing Richard and Melissa confronted with the consequences of their actions. Through the chaos, my phone vibrated with another text from Eleanor board members receiving calls from clients. 5 have expressed support for our offer already. Well done." The emergency meeting dissolved into smaller groups as Richard retreated to the executive suite with his inner circle. As I made my way back to my desk, colleagues approached me with a mix of reactions. "Did you really orchestrate a hostile takeover because they cut your pay?" one asked, incredulously. "Not exactly," I replied. "I helped Axion understand the true value of Meridian and the risks of the current leadership approach. The rest was their decision." Others were more supportive. "About time someone stood up to them," said Mark from engineering, who had seen his entire team's projects cancelled under Richard's cost-cutting. As the morning progressed, news outlets picked up the story. CNBC reported that Meridian stock had jumped 15% on news of the offer. Bloomberg quoted anonymous sources, saying that several institutional investors were favoring the Axion bid, given Meridian's recent underperformance. By noon, the situation had escalated further. Axion issued a second press release, announcing that they had secured statements of support from clients representing over 30% of Meridian's annual revenue. The release specifically mentioned the stakeholder clauses and continuity of service concerns. At 1 o'clock, I received a surprising email, an invitation to join an emergency board meeting at 3. It seemed that in the space of a few hours I had gone from non-essential to central to the company's future. The stage was set for the next phase of this corporate drama, and I found myself at its very center. The atmosphere in the Meridian offices that afternoon was electric with tension and uncertainty. Productivity had essentially halted as employees gathered in small groups, refreshing news sites for updates and speculating about their futures. Many approached me with questions I could not yet answer, while others kept their distance, unsure whether to view me as a traitor or a hero. At 2:30, I made my way to the executive floor for the emergency board meeting. The security guard who just yesterday would have questioned my access now waved me through with a knowing nod. Word had spread quickly about my role in the unfolding drama. The boardroom was already crowded when I arrived. Meridian's 9 board members sat around the massive table with Richard, Melissa, and James at one end. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thomas Bennett, our former CEO and still a board member, offered me a small smile as I entered. He at least seemed unsurprised by the day's events. "Miss Ross, thank you for joining us," said Patricia Winters, the board chairperson. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, we felt your perspective would be valuable." Richard glared but remained silent as I took a seat at the far end of the table from him. For those who have not been fully briefed, Patricia continued. Axion Systems has made an unsolicited offer to acquire Meridian Tech for $400 million. They have indicated that they have support from several of our key clients who have concerns about continuity of service under current management. She turned to me. "Miss Ross, it has come to our attention that you were informed yesterday that your position was being reclassified and your compensation reduced by 60%. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is correct," I confirmed. and you are named as a key stakeholder in contracts with several of our largest clients. With our 10 largest clients, yes. Those contracts represent approximately 40% of our annual revenue. Several board members exchanged glances. It was becoming clear that most had been unaware of these details. Can you explain the purpose of these stakeholder clauses? Patricia asked. They were designed to protect both the clients and Meridian by ensuring continuity of service, I explained. If a named stakeholder leaves the company, the client has the right to review and potentially renegotiate their contract. It was standard practice under Mr. Bennett's leadership. Thomas Bennett nodded in confirmation. Susanna was instrumental in securing and maintaining our most valuable client relationships. The stakeholder clauses were her innovation, one that our clients appreciated and that helped us win business from competitors. Richard could no longer contain himself. This is corporate sabotage. She deliberately orchestrated this situation by contacting Axion after learning about her compensation adjustment. Adjustment? Thomas raised an eyebrow. A 60% reduction is hardly an adjustment, Richard. It sounds more like a constructive dismissal. Before Richard could respond, Patricia's assistant entered and whispered something to her. It seems we have additional guests, Patricia announced. Eleanor Maxwell and representatives from Axion Systems have arrived for the meeting we scheduled with them. Richard looked stunned. You invited them here, without consulting me. The board voted to hear their proposal directly. Patricia replied coolly. As CEO, you serve at the pleasure of the board, Richard. We are obligated to consider all options that might benefit our shareholders. Eleanor entered the room with two executives I recognized from our meeting at Luciano's. She nodded briefly to me, but maintained a professional distance as we had agreed. Thank you for meeting with us. On such short notice, Eleanor began. We believe our offer represents a significant opportunity for Meridian's shareholders, clients, and employees. What followed was a detailed presentation of Axion's proposal. Eleanor outlined the financial terms, the strategic rationale, and, most pointedly, their plans for integrating the two companies. Unlike typical hostile takeovers that emphasized cost-cutting, Axion's plan focused on growth and retention of key talent. We have no intention of gutting Meridian, Eleanor stated firmly. Quite the opposite. We believe that the company's most valuable assets are its people and client relationships. Our integration plan includes retention bonuses for key employees and a commitment to maintaining current staffing levels for at least 2 years. The contrast with Richard's approach could not have been more stark, and it was not lost on the board members. Several were nodding as Eleanor spoke. What about the executive team? James asked nervously. Eleanor was diplomatic but direct. We would evaluate leadership roles based on cultural fit and performance. Some consolidation at the executive level is inevitable in any merger, but we would approach this thoughtfully. As the presentation continued, my phone lit up with a text from Andrew Reynolds at Global Solutions. Just got off the phone with your board chair. Told her we strongly support the Axion offer and have concerns about continuing with Meridian under current leadership. Hope that helps. Similar messages arrived from other clients throughout the meeting. The board members were receiving real-time confirmation of everything Eleanor was claiming about client support for the takeover. During a brief break, Thomas Bennett approached me in the hallway. I should have fought harder against Richard's appointment, he said quietly. I saw the warning signs, but thought the board would keep him in check. I am sorry you were caught in the crossfire. I loved working with you and building Meridian, I replied honestly. I never imagined being in this position. Thomas smiled sadly. Sometimes, the only way to save something is to let it be transformed. Meridian's culture and values might survive better under Axion than under Richard. When the meeting reconvened, Patricia announced that the board would require time to deliberate but would fast-track their decision process given the circumstances. In the meantime, they had some requests for both Axion and the current management team. Miss Maxwell, we would like more detailed information about your integration plans, particularly regarding client transitions, Patricia said. Miss Ross, the board requests that you work with both teams to ensure client continuity during this period of uncertainty. Richard began to protest but was quickly silenced by Patricia. Richard, the board has also decided to temporarily suspend the compensation adjustment for Miss Ross and any similar measures for other employees until this situation is resolved. As the meeting concluded, the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. Richard and Melissa left quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Eleanor approached me openly now that our connection was public knowledge. "Impressive performance," she said quietly. "Your clients have been calling us all day. They trust you more than they trust either company." "That trust was earned over years," I replied. "I will not betray it regardless of where I end up working." Eleanor nodded. "That integrity is exactly why we want you on our leadership team." Over the next 3 days, negotiations intensified. The board established a special committee to evaluate the offer, with Thomas Bennett playing a key role. Meridian's stock continued to climb as investors anticipated a successful takeover, or at least a higher competing bid. Richard made a desperate attempt to rally support, proposing his own restructuring plan that suddenly emphasized employee retention and client relationships. The irony was lost on no one, and his credibility was irreparably damaged. On Friday afternoon, less than 72 hours after Axion's initial offer, the board called another all-hands meeting. The room was even more crowded than before, with anxiety and anticipation hanging in the air. Patricia Winters addressed the assembled employees, her expression serious but not grim. "After careful consideration and extensive negotiations, the board has voted to accept a revised offer from Axion Systems to acquire Meridian Tech for $420 million, subject to regulatory approval." A murmur ran through the crowd as she continued. "This decision was not made lightly, but we believe it represents the best outcome for our shareholders, clients, and employees. Axion has committed to maintaining current staffing levels, honoring existing compensation packages, and restoring several employee benefits that were recently eliminated." As Patricia outlined the transition plan, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The company I had helped build would cease to exist as an independent entity. Yet many of the values and people I cared about might now be preserved rather than slowly destroyed under Richard's leadership. After the announcement, as employees dispersed to process the news, James approached me. "You outplayed us all," he said, with what sounded like reluctant admiration. "I never imagined those stakeholder clauses would be so significant." "It was never about outplaying anyone," I replied. "It was about recognizing the true value of relationships in our business, something the spreadsheets failed to capture." By the end of that tumultuous week, the business press was filled with analyses of the Meridian takeover coup, as one headline put it. Several articles specifically mentioned the role of stakeholder clauses and the undervalued employee who had become the linchpin of a $420 million deal. What had begun as a devastating personal setback had transformed into something much larger. A reminder that in business, as in life, true value is not always reflected in the numbers on a balance sheet. 6 months after the acquisition was finalized, I stood at the window of my new office on the 38th floor of the Axion headquarters. The view of the city skyline was impressive, but what I valued more was what this space represented: recognition of my worth and the opportunity to help shape the future of the combined company. The transition had not been without challenges. Merging two competing organizations never is. But under Eleanor's leadership, the process had been handled with remarkable transparency and respect for employees at all levels. As Eleanor had promised, I now held the position of Executive Vice President of Client Relations, with a compensation package that more than doubled my original Meridian salary. More importantly, I had been given the authority to implement client management practices based on the relationship-focused approach I had always advocated. Richard and Melissa had departed Meridian the day after the acquisition announcement, with severance packages that were generous despite their performance. Eleanor had been strategic in this decision, avoiding any appearance of vindictiveness that might have poisoned the corporate culture she was trying to build. Taking the high road with departing executives sets the tone for how we treat everyone, she had explained. This is about building something better, not punishing individuals. James had initially stayed on during the transition, but had recently accepted a CFO position at another company. Before leaving, he had stopped by my office. I should have spoken up in that meeting with HR, he admitted. I knew your value to the company, but allowed myself to be overruled. It was a failure of courage. I regret. We all face those moments where we have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent, I had replied. The important thing is to learn from them. The merger had allowed us to restore many of the employee benefits and cultural elements that had made the original Meridian special. The annual retreat was back. Educational reimbursements had been reinstated, and the break rooms once again had decent coffee. Small things perhaps, but symbols of a philosophy that valued people as more than just entries on a payroll spreadsheet. Andrew Reynolds from Global Solutions had been one of the first clients I contacted after the acquisition was completed. His relief was palpable. "We were prepared to move our business if you had left Meridian," he confessed. The stakeholder clause was important, but ultimately, it was the relationship we valued, not just the legal protection. His words reinforced what I had always believed, that business at its core is built on human relationships and trust. The story of the Meridian takeover had taken on a life of its own in business circles. I had been invited to speak at several industry conferences about stakeholder value and employee retention. Harvard Business Review had published a case study analyzing the acquisition with particular focus on how undervaluing key personnel can create strategic vulnerabilities. Not all the attention had been positive. Some commentators had characterized my actions as disloyal or calculating. I had struggled with those same concerns myself in the early days. Had I betrayed Meridian by helping facilitate the takeover? With time and reflection, I had come to peace with my decisions. Loyalty should be reciprocal. When Richard and Melissa dismissed me as non-essential and attempted to force me out without severance, they had broken the social contract between employer and employee. My response had been proportionate and ultimately beneficial for most of the people involved. One of my proudest achievements in the new organization was the mentorship program I had established for mid-level employees. Called Essential Talent, it was designed to identify, develop, and retain valuable team members who might otherwise be overlooked in traditional advancement structures. The next Susanna Ross might be quietly building client relationships in accounting or solving critical problems in IT, I told Eleanor when proposing the program. We need systems to recognize that value before our competitors do. As I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months, my assistant knocked on the door. "Your 3 o'clock is here," she said. "The new financial analysts from the training program." I welcomed the group of 5 young professionals, all recent MBA graduates with the same mix of ambition and uncertainty I had felt at the start of my career. "Before we discuss your rotation through the client relations department, I want to share a story with you about knowing your value and the importance of relationships in business." I told them a condensed version of my experience, emphasizing not the dramatic takeover but the lessons about recognizing and standing up for one's worth in the workplace. "The most important assets in this company are not on our balance sheet," I concluded. "They are the knowledge, relationships, and trust that each of you will build during your careers. Never let anyone convince you those are non-essential." After the meeting, I took a moment to reflect on how far I had come from that devastating day in the boardroom when my value had been so casually dismissed. The journey had been difficult, but the outcome had been beyond anything I could have imagined. I had learned that sometimes the most painful professional experiences can become catalysts for growth and positive change, that standing up for your worth is not just about personal benefit but can lead to systemic improvements. That loyalty to principles can be more important than loyalty to organizations that have abandoned their own values. Most importantly, I had learned that knowing your true value is the foundation for everything else in your career. When others fail to recognize that value, it does not diminish your worth. It merely reflects their limited perspective. Have you ever had to stand up for your worth in your workplace, or found yourself undervalued despite your contributions? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know they are not alone in these experiences. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder of their own value. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never non-essential to the right people.